Thanks so much. Our next speaker is Frank McCrory. He's a postdoc here at the Initiative on the Digital Economy, and he's been working on, Mustafa Suleiman, I mentioned earlier, that study looking at the projection of jobs in the future using ONET data. Frank has crunched into that data quite carefully, looking more at what's happened historically, and also looking at what's happening in wages, what kinds of skills are more in demand and less in demand over time. So I'll let Frank describe a little bit more details of what he's doing there. Frank.
So hello, Frank McCrory. This is a joint work with George Westerman and Eric Brynjolfsson. And we've heard about some really amazing technologies going on today. And what we're looking at here is how these things are sort of affecting the job market. Is everything going to get taken over by robots or not? And what sorts of skills that different kinds of people have? Where do they actually fit into the economy? So one factoid that you'll hear repeated very often is that average wages have been stagnant for 30 years. And what this masks is the fact that it's not that it's been stagnant for everybody. Some groups have been getting better off and other groups have been getting worse off. And it turns out that for decades, folks with a college education have been getting substantially better wages over time, whereas folks with less education have been doing worse off. Now, if you're an economist, it's really easy to recommend a very simple education policy, help everyone who can get a college education. It's even easier to make that recommendation if you're an economist who works for a degree-granting institution. The problem with this is that the jobless recovery since 2000, that college wage premium has sort of been deteriorating and narrowing. And it's not because the less educated workers are better off, it's because the college educated workers, are, at least some of them, are doing worse. So this is sort of becoming very chaotic, and we're not entirely certain what's been going on. We had this really nice pattern going on, but now it's sort of broken down for us, and it's making education policy a little bit more difficult question. So prior research had linked that college wage premium almost directly to IT investment. It was, there were a lot of moving parts in the economy, but there was very strong empirical evidence that it's pretty much IT that's been driving this. As IT investment goes up, the college wage premium goes up. It sort of kicked into high gear in the 1980s and have been going on. And the skill-based technical change posits basically that some type of these workers, the skilled ones, the ones that have more education, are the ones that benefit more from the technology. The job polarization that we saw since 2000 is what's bothered everybody about this. Okay, we expected job growth in the highest skilled jobs. That's where you can make the most money. People will intentionally skill themselves to get into that area. But we also saw growth in the lowest skilled jobs, and this is a really big puzzle, why this would end up happening. The thing to sort of understand here is that college is not actually a skill. People don't go to college to get a particular skill. People go to college and get a whole bunch of different skills. So what we need here is a richer set of skills. And one of the early research on here was from Dave Lauder, Frank Levy, and Rich Murnane about a very clever way of categorizing this. It's not one skill. It's not that just more education you have, the more skilled you are at everything. They split it into manual and to cognitive skills. They also split it into routine and non-routine skills, which is a really good way of capturing a lot of the different ways you can describe jobs that happen in the economy. And what has happened is the routine manual tasks, the assembly line kind of work, that's pretty much been getting the short end of the stick since the end of the first machine age. Okay, these are jobs that the wages have been going down for decades. This is not a new thing. But what is new in the second machine age is it's not just the manual tasks anymore that are being taken over by machines. Now routine cognitive tasks are being taken over. So this is no longer what would be considered low-skill work anymore. This is now things like bookkeeping, preparing tax returns. These are things that folks generally had gone to college to do. And suddenly, having a college degree isn't that much of a protection against unemployment. This makes it very complicated to try to set policies and try to give recommendations to high school students who are entering as labor force. One of the good bits of news is that the non-routine cognitive tasks, the sort of design work and imaginative stuff, those sorts of jobs are complemented. They become more valuable as this technology advances. So it's not all bad news. There's some of that's not red. So we wanted to look at this a somewhat different way than what had been done with the previous research. And the one thing we wanted to make sure that our model accounted for is the fact that a job can depend on more than one skill. There isn't one skill in the economy, and furthermore, every job might depend on more than one skill. So think of the skill requirements as sort of dimensions as opposed to categories, which is what a lot of the prior research have been doing. And we also wanted the data to tell us what the skills are. So this is more of a not quite machine learning algorithm for going through this, we took the ONET data set, which is set up by the government to basically tell high school students what they want to be when they grow up. And it's got incredibly detailed information about hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of occupations, hundreds of fields on each one of these things, incredibly rich data about what it is to be in this occupation, what does it require, how do you spend your day, what kinds of tools do you use, and things like that. We ran this through a procedure called principal component factor analysis to find out what the underlying dimensions were, and it turns out there's only about 7. So, and you can see them listed here. These are the sorts of things that you would expect to differentiate one kind of job from another. If I said one job uses a lot of interpersonal interaction and another otherwise identical job doesn't, we would consider those to be 2 different jobs. So that's the point behind this kind of factor analysis here. And what we wanted to do is we wanted to determine the wage effects of having these particular skills or having these features in your worker by using what's called hedonic regression. So is anybody here familiar with hedonic regression other than the marketing PhDs? So that's not nearly as much fun as it sounds like. It's a way of determining it's a way of determining how much the price is affected by the features in something. So in this case, we're going to call the price the wage that the person can earn, and the features are the various levels of skill that those workers have. So there's nothing really hedonistic about it. So, and what we wanted to do is we wanted to measure the effects of technology on these jobs. So we did this in 2 different ways. We said how much does a person use a computer in their job, and we also said what's the IT intensity. So as Christina was showing, that can have a very big impact on how companies are run. So we wanted to look at it both ways. Do you use a computer in your job, and also does your industry around you use a lot of computers? Because you don't need to actually be skilled in computers to be impacted by them somehow hitting your industry. So you don't need to take in all this at once, but I do want to see the big picture here that as computer use goes up, we have our 7 dimensions there. There are impacts. All of them are impacted in some way by the use of IT in your jobs, but they're not all impacted the same way. This idea that there is one kind of a skill or there's one kind of impact of IT doesn't really hold water. The story really is much more complicated than that. And we'll look at a couple of these in detail. So first thing is the dimension that we called awareness here. This basically means working outside. So it's things like your peripheral vision, your night vision, your sound localization, those sorts of abilities to have in you. If your job requires that and you work in a job that basically doesn't use computers at all, then this actually helps you. This helps you earn about $1 more an hour. So that's how you read this chart. Your wage per hour is affected to, which one's the laser? Okay, so up there you get about $1 more an hour for having a requirement of having having awareness in these very, very low IT jobs. Now, some of them actually are helped by having the presence of IT. So your facility with equipment, your supervisory skills, your ability to take initiative and be sort of an entrepreneur within your firm, all these sorts of requirements in your job either are improved sort of linearly with technology use in your job, or they sort of jump up there and plateau. But in any case, they're always positive, and they're sort of helped along, or at least not hurt by the presence of technology. There are others that, interpersonal skills and perception, they complement and they work well with technology up to a point, and they sort of reach this peak, and then they drop again. So it's not a simple relationship. It's not just linear. It's not more is better. It's not more is bad. There's an optimal amount someplace, and it's not a particularly high. We're looking at sort of like the 6th or 7th decile of computer use in these occupations. Yes? So awareness is sort of knowing about the situation that's going on around you. So it's things like the ability to operate a vehicle. It's the ability to see at night. It's the ability to localize sounds. Whereas perception is more about how sharp your vision is, how well you're able to discern speech from background noise. So perception is very directed. So I'm paying attention to Andy, as opposed to someone sneaking up behind me and I know they're there. So I would call awareness the more human sort of a trait. Perception is, we've been building sensors to pick away at perception for a very, very long time. So if perception is part of your job, like you're a wine taster, you probably don't want to be in a job that is heavily reliant on IT. It's better to be in one of these jobs that's not very reliant on IT. And the one that's sort of odd here is physical skills. This is the strength, stamina, dexterity, all the sort of things that, make someone look like a Neanderthal. You expect the very, very low IT jobs that this is sort of an advantage. If you're a security guard, you're a trolley driver, you are a hairdresser, having some physical ability makes you somewhat better able to earn wages in the market. That's a very expected sort of a thing. The middle here, those are those routine manual tasks I was talking about before. These are the things that have been under assault by automation for over a century now. And it's also not particularly surprising that the wages would be low there. What sort of surprised us was that high end at the very top. This is that gentle nudge that makes a technology be feasible. So the high IT occupations that you're looking here, a relatively manual job in high IT usage is something like a surveyor or a bioengineer. This, where having some dexterity or having some stamina sort of pushes the technology from being something that can just sit on a bench to actually be out in the world and do stuff. So we had this very weird sort of trough here. This was sort of an unexpected pattern for us to find. Now, this is within use within your job. You can also look at the industry around you. As you can see here, there's not much of an effect. It sort of fans out at the very end, except for this one perception where you see absolutely no effect whatsoever. This is, you usually don't want to be seeing this sort of thing in your data. So we have the perception is completely unaffected by how the IT intensity of your industry. So with some of the jobs here, they all require different levels of skill. And I'm looking at the ones that require the top quintile of skill in each of these various ones. The one I really want to point you to is the very bottom one, where it says at least one quintile, at least one of your skills needs to be in the top quintile. 3/4 of the jobs in the economy require you to excel at something. By excel, I'm saying being in the top quintile of something. Over here, we're looking at the earning power of all of the jobs, not so much on which skill it requires, but the fact that it does require high skills. So for these first guys here that don't require anything, this first cell, that's about 1/4 of the workforce, and they're earning about $13.39 an hour. If you have a skill, in other words, if your job requires you to excel in at least one skill, you get about a 25% wage premium. And a second skill gives you another 25% wage premium. Then it sort of levels off. But is that $13.39? Does that ring a bell with anybody? What have we been talking about for a new minimum wage for the last couple of months? It's a little higher than that. So basically, there's a quote from Second Machine Age: "There's never been a worse time to be a worker with only ordinary skills and abilities to offer." This is exactly those people that have only ordinary skills to offer. So what we can do with this is this is actually an old version of my slides, sorry. There's supposed to be something before this. So what we can actually do I'll sort of split this into short, medium, and long-term interventions that we can take here. In the short term, the most immediate need that we have is to address the long-term unemployed. So if there's a group of workers out there who have had persistently high unemployment, that's a pretty good signal that the market is not valuing those skills. So either maybe those people need to be reskilled in some sense, but there happens to be a little group that sort of got caught up by accident in this, which is folks who have been unemployed for 6 months or longer. We have quite a bit of empirical research that shows that no matter how skilled that person is, once they've been out of work for about 6 months, there's some sort of a rule of thumb that maybe they just don't want to work. And they just don't get called back for interviews. This 6-month window has remained persistent even when the regime of unemployment insurance has changed radically during the Great Recession. So it's not actually based on reality, it's just based on some sort of rule of thumb. The medium-term thing that we can do here is we can target specific folks for labor market interventions and reskilling, and we can actually look at the folks who are, specifically the folks who are offering their skills at a discount in the labor market. So I have a couple of examples here of the highly physical jobs that are in that middle, so the folks who are getting probably laid off from factories and things like that. Those are the ones that you want to aim at. You don't just sort of broadly give everybody in the world a Pell Grant. You can sort of intelligently aim this stuff, and you can reallocate these folks who are working, but they're working in areas where they're not earning as high a wages as they could have been. This is, by simply reallocating, you can actually make the economy work more efficiently here. You can actually put them in other places where their skills are more valued. So the physical jobs, the interpersonal jobs in a high IT area, these are jobs that are pretty much in the crosshairs of automation to begin with. We have effective computing, which is a couple of floors below us, which is about recognizing voice stress and whether someone actually understands you or not. So the computer would actually be able to understand that. You'll call this call center and you won't actually get a person, you'll get a machine. I mean, that happens to us all the time right now, but it's very obvious you're talking to a machine. This will actually be natural language interface, and that's going to be impacting a lot of the folks in those jobs anyway. There are plenty of places in the economy that interpersonal skills are valuable, but that's just not one of them. Another thing to keep in mind is that 3/4 of the jobs require you to possess the top quintile. They require you to excel in something. And this is a thing that we really need to get across to kids that we're still learning in school, that just sort of being average is not good enough. That you need to pick something and be good at it. It would help if you picked something that computers are not good at, but you need to pick something. Okay. And what we need to do is sort of point people towards the occupations where they're going to be racing with the machine instead of trying to race against the machine. So you want these sorts of jobs like the design sort of jobs, the management sort of jobs, the cognitive sort of jobs that actually benefit from the advances in technology, not ones that are racing against the machine where you're actually trying to provide the same skill that is actually being provided better by a machine. Now, there are a bunch of folks who've decided that on a third tack, they're going to run a completely different race. And they're going to do something that the computers aren't good at all right now. Interpersonal being the biggest example of those for the moment. Whereas computers at the moment are just really not any good at that. And you can work in that area and not really be at threat of automation yet. The issue is, first of all, you're not at threat yet. So it's not a good long-term strategy. The second problem is everyone else had the same idea, which is why wages are depressed in that area. So the folks who are depending on high interpersonal skills, they're having very, very low wages as a result of that. So this is an ongoing project, and we're going to be trying to tie together the changes in the skill requirements within a job, the shifts in employment across jobs, and also this work on the wages themselves to try to sort of get together at all the first order effects that are going on in the economy. And once we have that, we can actually start looking at second order effects. About what happens if medical diagnostics becomes cheaper? How does this ripple out through the economy? What if shipping becomes cheaper because of automated trucks? How does that ripple out through the economy? So, thank you. Thank you.
We're running a little late, but I think we have time for a couple questions. We'll squeeze them in on what's happening with skills and work in the economy. Yes?
A quick question.
Yes.
Yeah, you spoke about the specifics of technology,
Right.
specific skill, and this job and whatnot.
Yes.
That's a complicated problem. We can talk about specifically where to intervene.
Yeah.
But the sub-bullet, the first bullet was
Yeah.
that initiative was
Right.
the most durable skill.
Yes.
I looked
Yeah.
exactly what it was.
Right.
Era of rapid change.
Yes.
Which suggests focusing on building like an intrapersonal set of dispositions to enable people to adapt rather than focusing on the hard skills themselves.
Well, so you're going to need some sort of a knowledge foundation to be able to be effective, but the initiative is a very important part of it. You could be a person who's driven by initiative and be in sales, which isn't necessarily a particularly high-tech profession, but just being that intrapreneur or an entrepreneur, having some initiative, some persistence, that is a very, very important trait, especially if stuff is going to be changing out from under you. So you spent 4 years skilling yourself up to be a Java developer, and then suddenly there's some new language that you didn't even hear of when you were doing your school. I remember seeing a factoid that by the time an engineer graduates, half the stuff they learned is obsolete. So the sort of lifelong learning is kind of tied up in that initiative thing too. It's also highly correlated with sales jobs, but that's the folks who are very persistent and won't ever leave you alone until you decide to buy something. So initiative, it's a very important skill to teach, and it is something that can be taught. I mean, there's some folks who have it inherently, but it is something that we can try to get at our kids while they're still in school.
Will you come talk to my 13-year-old about the consequences? And maybe you can sort of tell me how not to stress him out too much.
Well, the not stressing him out part is hard. So the robots are coming after our jobs. And the thing is, there was a quote that a machine can do the work of 50 ordinary men, but it can't do the work of one extraordinary man. So the idea is to excel at something, and it doesn't have to be necessarily an academic thing. Some of these things that are complemented by IT don't necessarily require a college degree. The flip side of that is a college degree doesn't necessarily prepare you for these sorts of occupations either. So it does require a little bit of intelligence and planning to sort of look ahead. 13, I think there's still time. Once they actually have to like earn their own money, they might change their mind. Yes.
All right, thanks very much.
Thank you.